This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to welcome you to another edition of Toxic Bitcoin Saturday, in which we answer viewer questions, highlight important comments and questions, and also generally say things that are offensive, but also true. We begin with a tweet from Wealth Squad Chris, and the founder of the largest asset management company in the world is saying, I own Bitcoin. Obviously, Larry Fink of BlackRock, founder of the largest hedge fund in the world, saying, I own Bitcoin. Obviously, Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, co-founder of the largest company in the world. This is referring to Apple, and Steve Wozniak saying, I also own Bitcoin. Your cousin who barely made it out of 12th grade, Bitcoin is a scam. And then we have this amazing news that the head of the Czech Central Bank is investigating buying Bitcoin, actually putting 5% of their reserves, of the Czech Republic reserves, into Bitcoin. This is interesting, as Josef points out here, because the Czech Republic recently abolished capital gains on Bitcoin that's held for more than 3 years. So this is a relatively small country, but very exciting to see that they're looking into Bitcoin. And very strange, in fact, that's their head central banker who is getting into Bitcoin. Currently, the Czech Republic, though it's part of the EU, does use its own currency. It uses the Czech koruna. This is not good news for Christine Lagarde, and let's hear her response to other EU countries putting Bitcoin on their balance sheets.
And whether reserves of central bank should or could include Bitcoins. I think there is a view around the table of the Governing Council, and most likely the General Council as well, that reserves have to be liquid.
She loves the sound of her own
That
voice.
reserves have to be secure.
So the reserves have to be liquid. Well, Bitcoin is one of the most liquid assets in the world. Bitcoin is probably the most secure asset in the world. And instead, she wants central banks to hold bonds and melting fiat currencies on their balance sheets instead, as if that were more secure. But let's hear the rest of what she has to say.
That they have to be safe, that they should not be plagued by the suspicion of money laundering or...
Christine Lagarde is obviously very concerned about crime because she's a criminal herself. Christine Lagarde, IMF chief, back before she was ECB, head of the ECB, when she was IMF chief, she was convicted over a payout. But somehow these people always fail upwards. In terms of how she's done at the ECB, as we see here, the main task of the ECB, according to its own charter, its main task is to maintain the euro's purchasing power. Well, they've not done a very good job of that. The euro's lost almost 90% of its value against gold since its founding in 1999, and it's lost even more against Bitcoin. If you take a look at the inverse of this chart of the euro versus Bitcoin. This is okay, though, as Alistair Milne points out here. In any new revolution or technological revolution, we always have the innovators, we have the early adopters, we have the early majority and the late majority, and then we have the laggards, or as he calls them here, the Lagardes, with the picture of Christine Lagarde. I thought that was pretty funny. Meanwhile, as Eric Weiss points out, the die is cast. Nation states, companies, and individuals are clamoring to acquire Bitcoin. And here's a state-by-state tracking of states in the United States that have bills to put Bitcoin, a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the individual state, all the way from Alabama down to Wyoming, and where they're at, whether it's at the House Senate approval level, the committee approval level, etc. So this is coming, this is happening. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you to help to support this channel's educational mission. Hit the subscribe button. That does really help with the algorithm. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. Share this video with a friend or family member. So far we've been talking about nation state adoption of Bitcoin and central banks putting Bitcoin on their balance sheets. But I think it's very important to remember that grassroots Bitcoin evangelism and grassroots Bitcoin adoption is just as important, and maybe even more important than nation state or central bank level adoption. So that's why this week, and maybe every Toxic Bitcoin Saturday, I'd like to highlight a local project. Today we're going to be talking about BTC Isla. You can follow them on Twitter. I'll put a link. This is basically an island that is in the process of being orange pilled. This is Isla Mujeres off the coast of Cancun in Mexico. And the main orange evangelist here is Isabella. I don't know her personally. I've spoken with her online, and this does look like a very good project. So you can follow both BTC Isla and Isabella online. And as they've been posting, you can now buy or rent on Isla Mujeres, and you can pay in Bitcoin. So they have a website, Everything Isla Mujeres, is now accepting Bitcoin for all 130 properties on the island. I'll put a link to that in case you want to vacation here and pay using Bitcoin. People always say you can't spend Bitcoin anywhere, which is obviously not true. And it looks like there are other home services. There's Isla Home Services and mayakita.com. I'll put a link to this in the description notes below that also allow you to pay for accommodations using Bitcoin. And one of the things they've been doing is they've been orange pilling local merchants and stores and even taxi drivers. This post from BTC Isla today marks another huge win for our book. One of the Bitcoiners that is on the island got one of the taxi drivers to accept Bitcoin. It looks like he got him to download Wallet of Satoshi. Here's his Lightning address. Let's show him with Bitcoin is the better money. So you can either use this email address or this Wallet of Satoshi address to send some sats, or you can even scan this QR code on your screen. This is one thing that's amazing about Bitcoin. You can be watching a video like this and you actually send some sats to someone. So I would definitely follow this project. If you're planning on going to Cancun, pay them a visit as well. Moving on to this post from the Daily Kitty Cat. Maxis are so jelly right now that Trump rug pulled Bitcoin. Trump, obviously referring to Trump's meme coin. Trump will be used to pay off national debt and then become the new US dollar. No Bitcoin strategic reserve needed anymore. Bitcoin rug pulled epic. My response, you're a new kind of stupid. Obviously, U.S. national debt is 36 trillion or over 100 trillion. If you include entitlements, the coin market cap currently of the Trump coin fully diluted is 22 billion, and its current market cap for the circulating supply is only 5 billion. So it's very hard to get to the trillions from that, and this is not really something that you'd expect to appreciate quite that much over time. What we've been seeing this cycle is very interesting, as Tour points out here, this decoupling of Bitcoin and the crypto market caps. So every other cycle during the bull cycle, you really have the other cryptocurrencies besides Bitcoin pumping. This time Bitcoin is leaving them behind, perhaps because of the Bitcoin ETF, perhaps because of all the political moves to have countries and nation states start to accumulate Bitcoin. But this divergence is very interesting. It'd be interesting to see if crypto itself is finally being left behind. Troy Cross says something similar in this post. 3 years ago, Bitcoin dominance was 40%. Today it's 59%. ETH was at 18% dominance. Now it's 10%. All other coins combined fell from 42% to 30% of total value. Meantime, and I think this is the really interesting point, meantime, there are millions of new coins, thousands of new coins launched each day, something to think about. So you have these flash in the pan coins that then continue to trend towards zero, whereas the only survivor really is Bitcoin. This week, I also learned something new from Pierre Rochard about Ripple and XRP. What I hadn't realized is that XRP is actually missing the initial part of its blockchain history. Ledgers 1 through 32,569 were lost. And so they pretend that block number 32,570 is the Genesis block. So here's a blockchain that is incomplete, and who knows what kind of funny business went on in those first blocks, especially because this is a coin that had 100% pre-mine. So again, XRP, a complete joke of a cryptocurrency. I got a tweet here from Anthony Anderson directed at me. 2025 kicks off with big wins for crypto in the US and Ripple's growth. Ripple, obviously the parent company of XRP that created XRP and issued it. New MTL, new money transmitter licenses in New York and Texas. New customers onboarded and ramping up hiring across the US. This was supposedly something very special that Anthony Anderson was tweeting about, retweeting Ripple's tweet. My response, wow, a centralized corporation that issued a shipcoin getting new money transmitter licenses. How will Bitcoin ever compete with XRP? Obviously, it's a highly centralized project that no one even wants. Nevertheless, the CEO, Brad Garlinghouse, has been reaching out, trying to get the U.S. government to put XRP into the strategic Bitcoin reserve or the strategic crypto reserve, and saying that he wants to work together. Meanwhile, this is the history, as Daniel Batten points out here. Is this what you mean by working together, Brad? Ripple's anti-Bitcoin campaign to promote CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. So this is definitely a company and a currency, or a cryptocurrency, that's on the side of the central banks. It's hard to imagine something like this. Satoshi would be rolling in his grave if he heard about this, if he's currently in his grave. Greenpeace crypto billionaire lobby to change Bitcoin code. Greenpeace, Ripple lobby to move Bitcoin away from proof of work. XRP and Ripple and Brad Garlinghouse do not have a history of being helpful. And the good news is it's coming through the grapevine that XRP almost certainly will not be included in any sort of reserve. This was an interesting idea for a fundraiser, what they're calling a telehash, and basically what the 256 Foundation did. This is a nonprofit with a mission to advance free and open source Bitcoin mining software, firmware, and hardware solutions. They held their first annual fundraiser called the Telehash, and the way they did this was they allowed people to point miners to their node, point their hash to their node, try to mine blocks, and it turns out that a solo miner, a future bid Apollo solo miner, actually mined a block during the fundraiser and got the block reward of a little more than 3.146 Bitcoin, approximately $330,000 raised for this fundraiser. So not a bad idea. This is extremely lucky that this happened, but pretty cool to see the Bitcoin network itself essentially donating to a charity. If you want to learn more about FutureBit, I'll put a link to the machine they were using in the description notes below. If you want to learn more about home mining, I did a whole live class on my website, which I recorded, called Home Mining with Ocean, Datum, and Bidax, you know, those low Bidax miners. This was a very technical setup. If you're interested in following along, I'll put a link in the description notes below so you can join Bitcoin University Premium. Moving on to other news, Nobel laureate Eugene Fama, who's been obviously in the space for a very long time, and I believe he's the father of this idea of the efficient market hypothesis, which is about 90% true, but obviously not completely true. Eugene Fama predicts Bitcoin will become worthless. This is kind of sad to see. The main quote in here from Fama: "The persistence of Bitcoin poses a challenge to established economic principles. I'm hoping it will bust," Fama said, "because if Bitcoin doesn't bust and go to zero, you have to start all over again with monetary theory." He suggested that if Bitcoin maintains its value long-term, economists would need to fundamentally rethink their understanding of money and markets. Well, maybe they should. Maybe this is a good place to start. And I guess this is why even economic science must progress one funeral at a time. Imagine being this unintellectually curious, where you're hoping something is going to fail so that your pet theory doesn't get somehow overturned. But it's not looking good for Fama or the other economists, traditional economists, whether they're Keynesians or followers of Milton Friedman or whomever. It's not looking good for them because it looks like Bitcoin, rather than going to zero, is absolutely going the other direction. This prize that he has too is a bit of a fake prize. The Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences was not set up or established by Alfred Nobel. Rather, it's an award that's funded by the Sveriges Riksbank, which is the Swedish central bank. So this is very disturbing, having a central bank giving an award in economic sciences. And this is what you'd expect. You'd expect one banker giving an award to another banker. Meanwhile, another professor who needs to learn more about Bitcoin, this was Tad Smith, I believe, a professor at NYU Stern School of Business, saying, "I didn't realize that if the average year the money grows at about 10%, the average return in the S&P 500 is about 9.7, in other words, about 10%, then all the value created there is the money printer. In other words, the reason your S&P index fund holdings go up 10% a year is because the dollar's losing 10% purchasing power every year." Imagine this being an insight to a tenured NYU Stern School of Business professor. But the whole economic and the whole financial establishment, they're not even on square one. They have to completely revise their understanding, and Bitcoin is helping them do this, whether they choose to or not. In other news, we have Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy and his strategy of accumulating Bitcoin for MicroStrategy's balance sheet, hitting the front cover of Forbes, calling Michael Saylor the Bitcoin alchemist. There's a lot of talk about whether this is going to be another one of those Forbes magazine covers that ends up in retrospect being a curse. I don't think so, just given the nature of Bitcoin. It's one thing if you put SBF, who was a scammer, on the cover of Forbes and something bad happens. But I think Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy are pursuing an honest strategy. You may not like corporations accumulating a lot of Bitcoin, but it is an open, permissionless system, and I certainly don't think there's any fraud or anything there. And I also don't think that this will mark a top either in MicroStrategy's stock price or obviously in Bitcoin's price. But nice to see this hitting the mainstream and Bitcoin becoming more and more legitimized in the TradFi world. A question here, craziness in the cranium question, 250 years from today, more than 1/2 of the total amount of Bitcoin private keys have been lost and now inaccessible, dormant. So in other words, the 21 million supply has been cut in half to 10,500,000. At what level would this pose an issue? My response, you could run the world's economy, the whole world's economy, using just one Bitcoin since it's divisible. So it doesn't matter when Bitcoin gets lost. It's obviously, if it's your Bitcoin that gets lost, it does matter to you. But Bitcoin that gets lost is essentially a pro rata contribution to the rest of the Bitcoin network. And so this isn't a problem because Bitcoin is divisible and we can change the code to make it even more divisible. And so you could literally run the global economy on a single Bitcoin. Moving on to the category of ESG, I think it's important to pay attention to how fraudulent many of ESG claims are. And obviously ESG is out the window now. Larry Fink and BlackRock have denounced it. But this was an interesting fact I wasn't aware of. Solar, for those advocating for solar where it's hot and dry, pay attention. This is a tweet by Artemis for Now by Bernie. Globally, it's estimated that over 10 billion gallons of fresh water are used annually to clean solar panels, about enough to supply drinking water for up to 2 million people. So when they're doing the accounting calculus of how good solar panels and wind turbines, for example, are for the environment, they always conveniently leave out things like this. This is a ridiculous way to generate energy. Moving on to the RFK Jr Senate confirmation hearings. Senators pause RFK hearing to announce the next round of questions is brought to you by Pfizer. I thought that was a pretty good meme from Babylon Bee. A Midwestern doctor points out here, the hostility that RFK Jr. experienced at his hearing was directly proportional to how much pharma money each senator received. If you watch this hearing, you were probably appalled, as I was, just by how hostile the senators were, what a game of gotcha they were playing, and there's how there's really no interest in the health of the American people or in some of the ideas that RFK Jr. has. In fact, each of the senators simply repeated the same attacks we just saw flood the mass media, all of which were blatant lies. And we have Senator Warnock and Senator Sanders here receiving almost $2 million from Big Pharma, Elizabeth Warren receiving $1.2 million. It's really ironic because Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren came on the scene looking out for people trying to fight big, evil corporations, and instead they've been completely co-opted by large corporations. Callie Means here tweeting, the Democrats questioning Bobby Kennedy have not said the words diabetes, obesity, or heart disease once. All angry questions about vaccines. We have a chronic disease epidemic. If a politician gives a damn about children's health, that is all we would be talking about. I think that's a really good point. And then Carnivore Aurelius is pointing out here, pretty wild that the Democratic Party used to be the party of back-to-nature hippies, railing against big corrupt corporations. And now they're funded by pharma, big finance companies, and big tech oligarchs calling out people for questioning the status quo. If you haven't contacted your senator yet about the RFK hearings or the Tulsi Gabbard hearing, I would encourage you to do so. I think those are two very important appointments for the Trump administration. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and leave a comment or question below, and I hope to include it in a future video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.